Hindutva as an ideological project is one, but Hindutva as an emotional project is also more having a more layers or layers of the meaning, which is not necessarily directly getting influenced in relation to policies. RSS involvement was very direct, very much like aggressive sometimes, but you also have that whole ecology that was moving in that direction with the neoliberalism, with some kinds of state policies. Hinduism does not know how to treat them, and Hinduism also have some kinds of fear to that kinds of religion and those kinds of beliefs. See what is happening with the question of cow. So you can eat mithun, you cannot eat mithun cow, you can eat this cow.
Yes.
So they are coming with their own kinds of fracture, their own contradiction and things. So it is not the question of hijab, like how you are going to dress, to what much you are going to cover, whether that is a regressive practice or not. That is not their concern. Concern is just because you are coming from one specific religious community. There has been very that kinds of understanding that this is just about BJP. Once BJP is out of power, then we will have very same ideal society and things like that. But I don't think that is going to be the case. There are different ways I'm thinking about the questions of a spectacle, because generally the people who talk about Hindutva, they talk Hindutva through ideology.
Right.
And ideology is definitely one of the major factors that one cannot deny. But at the same time, you know that how Hindutva is also doing othering at the various levels. Either you are thinking in terms of clothing, that we can recognize people by clothes, to that extent also food culture, to the questions of meat, beef, and you name the many things that generally you associate with the everyday life, and generally you think that politics does not exist there. But there I am more interested in the questions of everyday life. I am more interested in the questions of emotion and the othering that happens through art, the othering that happens through food, the othering that happens through clothing, the othering that happens through color, the othering that happens through festivals. So generally people don't pay attention to those things. So for example, if you are thinking about any festivals in India, then you can easily go and we assume that okay, you can go and celebrate on road, you can go to the streets and can have a procession, but the same one communities are not allowed to do, other communities are not allowed to do. And then you can think about various other questions where things that are quite granted for one community cannot be granted to other communities, and then this is becoming very normal and getting normalized in our everyday life. And I think when you are thinking through this idea, the idea of the food culture, the clothing, many other factors, then I think people who are part of the community, they are feeling more othered than when we think about the policy knows that okay, you have right-wing government and they're going to have this policy. If you're thinking about BJP, then people know that BJP is in the power, so they're going to do these things. So that is quite obvious. But when you are getting other, that okay, you cannot participate in this festival, you are other, you cannot do these things in a street, then you feel that oh my god, okay, so now you cannot eat this food. And then I think the othering happens at a very different level, at emotional level, at the level of your feeling, and that hurts people more than anything else. See, there are many scholars who makes a lot of difference between Hinduism and Hindutva. One would say that, for example, you have Pratap Bhanu Mehta, and he had whole piece on Hindutva and Hinduism, and he was saying that how Hindutva is trying to colonize Hinduism, because Hinduism is they will argue that Hinduism is more participatory, Hinduism is more diverse in that sense, but Hindutva is a more political kinds of outfit. It is politics and religion coming together, politics, religion and nation coming together, and that makes Hindutva. So Hindutva is a project. One can say that Hindutva is a political project, and there is no questions on that Hindutva is a political project. Hinduism can have a lot of issues, lot of problems in terms of either you are thinking about caste society, either you are thinking about hierarchies, either you are thinking about the questions of othering also. Then Hinduism still operates in a very different way. Hindutva is a typical a very clear political project where there is an aim to make people other, that you are other, and then we are going to form a nation based on some kinds of idea of the ethnicity, some idea of the questions of Hinduism, and that become. But at the same time, I will say that Hinduism and Hindutva also complement each other. So for example, now you can see that how something that were Ram Navami. Ram Navami, one can say that it's a big festival. I discuss in this book about Ram Navami festival. Ram Navami is a Hindu festival, one can say Hindu festival, but Ram Navami as a Hindu festival is very easily getting appropriated by the Hindutva, and then it becomes difficult to make a distinction between what is Hinduism and what is Hindutva, and there I think that distinction becomes very blurred and you cannot make a distinction. So for example, one that see there we need to make a distinction between the things before 2014 and things after 2014 when Narendra Modi coming to power with majority, BJP is coming to power with a very different kinds of color and outfits. But if you're thinking, so one can argue that Hinduism was a very much part of some kinds of understanding of India itself. So there was a not a clear separation. So either you are thinking about Nehru, taking participating in some kinds of ritual, and then you have a lot of stories, many stories where Hinduism as a ritual, Hinduism as some kinds of practices were very much part of the nation. But now there has been a clear attempt to make other as a other, and that makes a lot of distinction. And in that way, so for example, if you are thinking about any state institutions now, either you are going to Sangeet Natak Academy, either you are going to Sahitya Academy, then there is a clear acceptance of Hinduism or some kinds of Hindus, but others are not allowed. That was not the case earlier. There was at least there was a pretenses to maintain some sense of secularism. Now that pretension is over, that no, we are moving towards Hindu nation, and therefore I think, and therefore a spectacle becomes very important there. So for example, either you are thinking about Republic Day parade, either you are thinking about religious procession, both the boundaries are getting completely blurred here. Now you cannot make a distinction that whether it's a Republic Day. So within the Republic Day parade, you can see many cultural expressions that is coming directly through Hindu kinds of things, others are not getting allowed, or either others are getting marginalized, and that way the whole expressions is becoming part of the spectacle in which Hindutva is getting formed and others are getting othered. Now we have clear reports and accounts that clearly says that one festival is getting allowed, one is becoming part of the state patronage, where you are getting garlanded, and that whole flower is getting offered through aeroplanes and this whole helicopters and things. So that one can see that it's a Kumbh, the way Kumbh was organized in 2025. So there was a whole clear state was very much involved in in big way, in massive way, where they were trying to patronize, trying to patronize, but also trying to appropriate these festivals in their own ways. And on the other side, you have even namaz, you cannot offer namaz in streets, you are not offered even in your own house and things. If it is in the roadside, then it is becoming difficult. So there is a clear pattern now emerging where there is a marked differences that what is allowed and what is not allowed, what is going to be patronized and what is not going to be patronized. So now we have very clear case, and therefore this is the book about, when I'm talking about a spectacle state, then this is largely the book about, generally we think that okay, this is just about festival, and this is not about, this is just about some kinds of food. But again, this Hindutva is working at various levels. This is not just about nation state. This is not about forming one policies. This is not about just about anti-CAA act. It is coming to your everyday life. It is coming to the level of senses. It is coming to the level of breathing. It is coming to the level of your clothing. And therefore, I think that area is becoming very crucial than I will say that other areas for that matter. Now, of course, a state is very much discriminatory, the nature of a state, the way they are enacting policies. So one, that we can think a state in relation to policies, what kind of policies are getting enacted. So whether you are thinking about Kumbh festival or other festivals are not getting patronized that way, where clear indication is there. But Hindutva is more than a state. That is the point I'm trying to make.
Right.
Hindutva is not just about a state. Hindutva is, and that is the example I give. For example, you have I know many people, and in fact my family friends, they are very critical of the Modi government. They are very critical of the BJP government. But what has happened many times that they are equally fascinated by Kumbh. So they, in daytime, they were very critical of Modi government. In the night, they were planning to go to Kumbh. When they go to Kumbh, when they went to Kumbh, they were full of appreciation for Yogi government. Oh my God, they have done something remarkable for Hindu. And that those are the feelings that are getting mobilized here. And those feelings are coming at the very social level. And therefore, my whole idea is that that ideological one, that in Hindutva as an ideological project is one, but Hindutva as an emotional project is also more having a more layers or layers of the meaning, which is not necessarily directly getting influenced in relation to policies. So it is not like, I will say that it is not the BJP who is always working and trying to enact some kinds of policy. People are equally mobilized. People are very much mobilized. People are seeing in that way, and they see that like sense of participation is there, sense of othering is there, and that is like becoming some kinds of very complementary kinds of channel in which Hindutva as a political project is also influencing the emotional project, but also emotion, because that emotional undercurrents are very much there. It is very easy for Hindutva to appropriate them. One still would can say that it is coming, at least when we are thinking about Hindutva, then you can see that there is a channel, like for either you are thinking about mass media, that whole media, the way media works, the way it, so it is all like many times it's a top down, media does top down kinds of approach, but those approaches are able to mobilize that very ground level or low, you can say that top down and ground level kinds of mobilization. And in when you have very that violent ground level mobilization, then many times the top down, the top, like people at the top or policy makers at the top, they also try to see that which way it is moving, and then they will try to also make some kinds of negotiation. So one way of seeing is that definitely it's a top down approach, but at the same time it cannot say that it is just happening that on top, is some people are sitting there or injecting or some kinds of mind capture, people say that this is a mind capture. No, this is also because you already have that kinds of energy, you already have that kinds of those sentiments, you already have those emotions that have been percolated through history, and now that those things are getting mobilized. Yeah, so that is one of the factors. In fact, in my previous book, Body on the Barricades, I discuss about these things. So for example, I give the example of that how we used to mark our attendance in a school. I come from Bihar, and then when I used to go to the primary school, government school, then the way we used to mark our attendance is roll number 1 Bharat Mata Ki Jai, roll number 2 Bande Mataram. This was the way we used to mark the attendance. And now, so you don't need so those feelings were already there, because now maybe with the JNU exposure, with outside exposure, I am becoming critical of those kinds of practices. But if you are thinking about those socialization and that education that percolated in your belief system, that percolated in your ideology, those things are very much there. It just needs some kinds of anchoring. So what Hindutva is able to do, that anchoring, that just you anchor, and those things are already there. So just need to. So one thing, you are right that RSS has been done whole tremendous work from across India, where they try to inculcate some kinds of belief, some idea of the nation, some idea of the community and culture. So those courses were very much there. Hindutva, RSS, and different outfits. It is not just RSS, different other outfits.
The umbrella.
From educational institutions to religious institutions, all were catering to some kinds of things. And therefore, that RSS involvement was very direct, very much aggressive sometimes, but you also have that whole ecology that was moving in that direction with the neoliberalism, with some kinds of state policies. So if you are thinking in terms of neoliberalism, if you are thinking about media, corporate media, then they all supported and created the grounds. So one, that it was possible through RSS, but that is not enough. For example, in Bihar, RSS was never strong. If you are thinking Jharkhand RSS has some good base, but if you are thinking about Bihar, then RSS was never that strong. But there was a whole favorable condition for the BJP, for these kinds of forces, and where it becomes quite easy for them to make their inroads and bring these kinds of mobilization that was quite unthinkable few years back. Yes, so one can say, I will not say diverse. One is that you're right, it is a diverse country in terms of religion, in terms of culture, in terms of
Language.
different belief systems, languages, and name. But I would better say fractures. It is a country full of fractures. Fractures in relation to caste, in relation to gender, in relation to different kinds of ethnicity. So many fractures, and that is where how Hindutva is able to mobilize those fractures. How they are, so they are able to look for through the fault lines. What are your fault lines? And through those fault lines, you are able to put some kinds of infrastructure. And those infrastructure is getting provided through the media. Those infrastructures are getting provided through some kinds of religious mobilization. Those infrastructures are getting supported through some kinds of belief systems. And I think so. It does not mean that fractures have been completely eliminated. So one can say that okay, now you have Hindutva as a solid ground. Hindutva is on solid grounds. So does it mean that people are united and they are solidly come together? That is just still not the case. And we have seen, like during the UGC protest case, suddenly you see that how the upper caste are started reacting in a different ways, and the people who are coming from Dalit Bahujan are started reflecting, reacting in a different ways. Suddenly you have this Biswas, poet Biswas is talking in a very different sense. Otherwise earlier they were all talking Hindutva, we all support one kinds of nation, religion and things like that, and suddenly you see that the fracture got very obvious. So I will say that still those fractures remains very much there, but Hindutva has such a kinds of I will say favorable condition in a different ways. And also if you are power, if you have money, you have massive power, corporate power, massive money and things, then you are able to, I will say, eliminate or able to suppress those fractures. But I think those fractures, one can say that okay, many times fractures is not good, but I think many times those fractures also becomes a hope that we are so fractured society that one can only get united through the spectacle. That is the spectacle, and that is the otherwise we all are completely. Yeah, so that has been very Savarkar's idea about fatherland, that if you are coming from the fatherland or this land, then we can still accommodate you. But it is about that was his idea, that it's about outsider. Outsider is who is not from the fatherland. So basically, and there has been an attempt from that side to accommodate either Sikhism, to accommodate Neo-Buddhism, to accommodate other kinds of Adivasi religion and different other kinds of folk religion. Because when we talk about Hinduism, then we think that Hinduism is everything. No, that is not the case. Either you going to any parts of India, you have so many folk beliefs, folk religions that is still not institutionalized under Hinduism. Hinduism does not know how to treat them, and Hinduism also have some kinds of fear to that kinds of religion and those kinds of beliefs. But I think that maybe for in years, maybe for few years, they are able to contain these beliefs. They are able to give us an idea that we all are united, we all are part of the fatherland. And Sikhism, we can contain Sikhism, we can contain Adivasi religion, we can contain other kinds of Buddhism and things like that. But that is not going to be the case in long run. That I believe that, because all these religions are not just a religion. They were not just was some kinds of offshoot of Hinduism. They were also came against the Hinduism. They also came against some kinds of caste practices. They came against some kinds of orthodox practices. And I think that is their currents. That is their underneath currents. And therefore, they cannot be contained for a long time. And that is what I will say, that yes, they will try to contain everything together. They can make that kinds of claim that we all are part of all these religions are part of the fatherland. But I don't think that whole argument of fatherland will help in the long run, because these are the religion also contain lot of contradiction, lot of fractures, lot of resistance. And I don't think it is that easy to contain them in some kinds of similar umbrella or similar idea of the nation. Yeah, it has a lot of limitations, and that is what they are trying to contain. They are trying to see Hindutva. One is we are thinking Hindutva is some kinds of religious national project, but other, because Hindutva is able to manage. Now we have clear evidences that is emerging from election, that whole manipulation is happening, corporate media, complete capture is happening, not only because people are mobilized, it is also happening through different other kinds of mechanisms. So, and that shows that Hindutva is not able to, if that would have been the case, then you give the slogan of Hindutva, people could have been united, they could have been voted for one party. But people are still not able doing that, and that shows that those contradictions are there, those hopes are there. One that of course and that is what I was trying to say, that Hindutva still is not sure about what to do with the clothing. So it is not coming from very monolithic idea. Either you are thinking about Christianity or some kinds of tenet. It is not the religion of tenet that where people are following one kinds of things in terms of ideology, in terms of principles, in terms of what you want to eat, what you cannot eat. There are so many practices. There is no standard, and therefore one can say that it's a full of its own contradiction. See what is happening with the question of cow. So you can eat mithun, you cannot eat mithun cow, you can eat this cow.
Yes.
So they are coming with their own kinds of fracture, their own contradiction and things. Same thing is happening in terms of dress. So you're going to cover your body, and how you see that hijab is very dangerous. Hijab appears very dangerous for you, but sari, when you are wearing that sari or that kind of dress, ghungat, then that is fine. So there is no clear, and how you're going to deal with the question of modernity, how is going to deal with the question of secularism. So they don't have very clear pattern. And therefore that things and therefore one can say that it is just about because Muslims are practicing it, that is why it is bad. If suppose if you have Hinduism is practicing something very similar to hijab, that should be fine. So it is not the question of hijab, how you are going to dress, to what much you are going to cover, whether that is a regressive practice or not, that is not their concern. Concern is just because you are coming from a specific religious community. And therefore, to that extent that even if you're wearing modern dress, they will say that okay, you have now corporate terrorist or corporate Muslim terrorist. So that is the image through their working. So it is not about some kinds of pattern of the dress, or through the dress you can recognize. Basically, you cannot recognize through the dress. And I can give example from of my own friends, and she was sharing me this whole story. She comes from Muslim community, and she was saying that how when she wears something so-called Muslim dress, either any kinds of dress, and she feels that oh my God, is she getting regressive? Is she becoming religious? But when she herself is wearing some kinds of sari, quote unquote Hindu dress, she feels quite comfortable. That and that is the feeling that she is getting. And this is happening at various levels. That what you are eating when you are walking, then you are getting affected by your own kinds of emotion. You are feeling so other that you are trying to self-censor your own kinds of appearance. You self-censor your own walking. You self-censor your own image, because now that other image or the image of the spectacle becomes so predominant that became the ideal, that became the natural, that became the normal. And that is the trajectory. That anything other is that make you self-doubt. That am I right? Am I not wrong? How can I dress like this? How can I eat like this? What is the harm if I will not eat beef? Yes, so there has been very that kinds of understanding that this is just about BJP. Once BJP is out of power, then we will have very same ideal society and things like that. But I don't think that is going to be the case, because see, Hindutva is not just about politics. It is not about BJP coming to the power. It is part of your everyday life. It is part of your culture, and that is the whole argument in my book. Once the government will go, then you will be able to take it back. No, that is not the case, because now the hatred has gone to that level. Such an extreme level, that whole pattern has emerged at a various level in relation to festival. The communities are already othered in a different ways. So even if you want to recover, it will take years to recover those kinds of quote unquote some kinds of practices from the past. And I don't think that is going to be very easy task. But yes, I think that it can be it's also about different kinds of regime we have. It is getting supported by the corporate, it is getting supported by different other kinds of networks. Once the government is not in power, once the state is not in power, where you don't have now you don't have the sense of fear from, you have full impunity for one community. If you don't have that kinds of impunity, then some things can reverse back. But I don't think that is going to be such an easy task to make the changes that happen at the cultural level, at the level of dress, at the level of the food, at the level of education, at the level of the language, Urdu, Hindi, and all these divided. Yes, so one that we can say that one that like where there was a whole idealization of Nehruvian era, that it was very secular democratic period, but we also know that what was the undercurrents,
Right.
what was the state kinds of approach to religion or a specific religion in that way. So of course, like no, that was not appearing so visible ways, but those approaches were very lenient towards Hinduism. Hinduism was almost becoming a normal course of
Yeah.
life, normal course of institution, normal course of some kinds of understanding. So those undercurrents were there, and that those were the undercurrents that Hindutva was able to mobilize in a significant way. So when we see changes now, it looks very visible, very dramatic, but that is not the case. You already have several years of work, not only the works of only RSS and Hindutva kinds of organization, but in general, that was the general conditioning of the life in which nation took the shape or nation took the inroads. So that was already happening, and I have given you examples of my own, that how either you're marking attendance or like in terms of food, in terms of like some kinds of discourses, that was just some kinds of very understanding that through which we were working. Now even one accept that now there is a Hindutva takeover, complete takeover, and now that is going to decide the course of the future. I think maybe for a few years, and still we are seeing that one. But you also see that a lot of contradictions are already emerging. So now you are talking about like monuments, that okay, we will dig all the monuments. But like you go to many parts of India, there are other monuments also.
Right.
As to what extent you can dig,
Dig,
and if you're
right.
going to dig, then I think there's a chance that you can also dig your own grave. So I think that is like that is also hope, that creates a lot of hope also, that maybe I'm not saying that necessarily there will be go back in the Nehruvian era
liberal
or
era.
that era. We cannot be sure about like how it is going to shape. But again, I am quite sure that this is not going to be the condition for long run.
Right.
Because not this is the like things that is going to work, because now you have some kinds of condition in which they are able to mobilize, they are able to get support, but this cannot be a kind of like long run kinds of idea in which like things can go and move on. Yeah, so to see, like when if I remember, and one can remember from their own like my own journey and things, then I remember that like even in a school and summer spaces there were some kinds of like some kinds of sacred images. Then there will be like I remember that Isa Masi will be there, one something will be there, something. So there was a whole like some kinds of pretense, like I will see some idea about maintaining some kind of secularism.
Right.
That is the way India interprets secularism. That is okay, you are also accepted, you are also accepted, you are also accepted. So those things were already there.
Right.
Like now the displacement is happening. That okay, be like one image is accepted, but others have to be like curtailed out or put outside. You are not allowed, and that is the way that things are happening, unfolding now, and that is becoming like some kinds of like very accepted kinds of norm. That how can, and it looks very like normal that if you go to any police station, a school, then Saraswati, go to IIMC, Indian Institute of Mass Communication, on the main gate you have like Saraswati, like a statue, Saraswati, a statue. But again, you think about like writing something in Urdu, and then it will feel that what you have done. So I think that and but again, this Saraswati statue that I'm talking about is not new. It is not done by like any perhaps the BJP government. It has happened like before. So those were very much there, part of some kinds of belief that was getting like part of some kinds of mainstream society. Now it is getting like it's about all the questions about like sidelining one or like othering others, and that is becoming the, I will say, the kinds of like crux of the matter then. There's one that will like book challenges very like the way Hindutva is understood in terms of like some kind of, so Hindutva generally you have a lot of writings about ideology. There is like somebody is trying to plant something. It is always like a top-down approach that okay, RSS headquarters is deciding everything, but that is not the case. I'm saying that that was like some kinds of cultural mainstreaming was already happening. Hindutva is just trying to like put some anchor those things. So for example, think about like Ram Navami festival. That Ram Navami festival was there. You just now put one Hindutva songs, and then that whole things gets mobilized. Those energy was there, participation was there. It's just like trying to make one shift. And Kumbh Mela, you're going to Kumbh Mela, but you also put like like photos or that kind of big advertisement of Hindutva project, that what we are doing for the nation, what we have done in a kinds of like on the borders, and that is the way Hindutva is able to inflict your whole like things, and that is what it challenges. That Hindutva is very much part of our everyday life. Unless you are not challenging those connotation, Unless you are not thinking about that, unless people are getting like, self-conscious about their own image, then perhaps we are not able to fully capture that how Hindutva is working. Thank you so much.